Coming up in this episode.
Education for me is absolutely critical on top of that engagement. And so it's educating communities, especially young people, on what is a data center, what is the role that they play in that, and the opportunities that actually, it opens up for them as well.
Politics 101 is the same as being the new kid at school and making new friends 101. I mean, you go in and you're present and you listen and you learn and you're curious.
This episode of the Critical Careers Podcast is sponsored by CBRE, AVK, Evershed Sutherland, JLL, and Mace Construct. Hi, I'm Joyce Wady. Welcome to the Critical Careers Podcast. On today's show, I'm talking with Sarah King and Anna Solar-Bassett on why communities are pushing back on data centers. First up, we'll hear from Sarah, where she and I talk about why education about the data center industry and understanding local issues are so important to community engagement. Let's get started. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today on Critical Careers. Data centers are really facing a point in time where they need to engage with local communities more. So I wanted to kind of get your take, because I know you've got some interesting background and some great expertise from other industries that we can, think about for the data centers and stuff. So why don't you start by telling us, how did you get here and what has been your career journey so far?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I didn't start in the data center industry. I'm relatively new to it. So I've been with the data center industry for about a year and a half now. And before that, I came from mining, so extractives and oil and gas. But I actually started my career in something completely different, which is quite probably unique to lots of people in the data center industry. But so I started working for large global NGOs. So I worked in international development and humanitarian aid, actually mainly based in fragile states or underdeveloped countries. So I started my career actually right after the Arab Spring, going to Sana'a in Yemen, and supporting communities having access really to healthcare.
Okay.
In quite a war-torn, unstable country. I've helped also with the Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone as well, and Afghanistan as well, helping young girls have access to education and to healthcare as well. So very different than what I'm doing now in the data center industry, but it kind of all sort of relates. And really that is around community engagement and stakeholder engagement and really understanding, your context and what communities need. And so obviously in the context of Yemen or Afghanistan or Sierra Leone, it's very different, but it kind of the principles and methodology are really the same, which is just around listening to communities and understanding what they need and really engaging them.
So how has that work kind of, like you said, that there are elements that kind of relate to what you're doing today. So what are some of those things that you're able to kind of pull into your role today at AVK?
Once I left the NGO sector, I moved into mining, into oil and gas after that. And so again, it's very much around community engagement. And I think the biggest lesson really is to listen and really not to tell communities, and knowing that every context is different.
Yeah.
So even, yes, obviously I've worked in underdeveloped countries, but even there are obviously similar challenges in places like, in the northeast of the UK, for example. So it's just really understanding your context and going in to really understand and demonstrating that you legitimately care about what they have to say, rather than telling them what they have to say or thinking that what what they want. And sometimes the things that when you listen to them, you're quite surprised about kind of the feedback that they say.
Sure. That makes sense. Because when you're in the industry, you talk to people in this industry, you have to kind of step outside the bubble sometimes to kind of understand what the outside perception is. I make the mistake of doing that on social media, which, they always say don't read the comments, and I really need to take that advice on. But you do see posts out there, you see a lot of videos. I see friends sharing them, and there's so much misunderstanding, but I also don't want to have an assumption about the fear behind it, or what they may not understand about it, or what's driving the decisions, or what may be happening in the local community that is triggering that reaction.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think education is such an important part of this. And it's really for any type of business or, large infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so it's, so when I worked previously to AVK, I worked at BP and worked on very large critical infrastructure in the northeast of England. And some of it was building, carbon capture technology. So that's quite new. That's new to the UK. And also hydrogen production as well. And so there's quite a lot of uncertainty around hydrogen and the use of it and the safety of it, and et cetera. And so really it was around, a big part of the job was to help educate the communities in terms of the safety of it. So it applies the same thing for data centers, is that, like you said, not many people know what a data center is. No one really thinks about their carbon footprint when it comes to using their phone and where those, when you think of the cloud, no one really thinks actually it's sitting in this big warehouse somewhere in the countryside in the northeast of the UK. And so education for me is absolutely critical on top of that engagement. And so it's educating communities, especially young people, on what is a data center, what is the role that they play in that, and the opportunities that actually, it opens up for them as well. And through that, also, young people can also educate, the older generations about that as well, and actually get people excited. Sometimes it's hard to think about how people get excited about data centers, but get excited about the opportunities that they could access.
I mean, to that point, though, like I was able to sit in on a young person roundtable a couple months ago now, and talking to the younger people that had come into this industry. What was it that excited them about being a part of it? And all of them said, it's fast growing. It's the future of where things are going, and they want to be a part of it early on and be there for that growth stage. So they do view there being something that is exciting about this industry and wanting to be a part of something that has kind of a future technology.
Yeah, and I think raising the profile of the industry and those opportunities is absolutely critical for the entire industry. And that really means getting into schools, talking to young people of all sorts of ages, starting really young.
Yeah.
So there's lots of opportunities. And so absolutely there's an opportunity to engage with schools and universities and colleges to really demonstrate the opportunities, and actually not even demonstrate, but inspire young people.
Yeah, right.
To think about how they themselves could fit into this industry.
Yeah.
In the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a big part of what we're trying to do with Critical Careers is, we want other women to see how women are building great careers here, how much they're enjoying it, the sense of community that they're finding, because that doesn't exist in every industry for women. And if there's a place where you can find that and that's important to you, it's good. You need to know that it does exist.
Absolutely. And I think too is that there's still not as many women in the industry like in other industries.
Yeah.
So I think, again, we have this opportunity to inspire young women, to come and join us. And like I said, you don't have to be an engineer, although we definitely need engineers in the industry, to join it. And how do we inspire that? And really by doing that is demonstrating role models, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And also creating a more equitable workforce and industry for women.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to bring them in, but actually it's also about creating that kind of equitable environment for them to make sure that, we are different as women and we have different bodies and different needs and so forth. And actually, the more women we have, the more opportunity we actually can change things that actually makes things more equitable for us. And much more inclusive and diverse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is really, I think, is really important.
Absolutely, for sure. So kind of getting back to your point about the education needed, are there, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 things that you've found that have worked in other industries that the data center industry should be thinking about in terms of how do we educate the communities or how do we engage with the local communities?
Yeah, I think also it starts with thinking a bit more strategically. And so kind of what I've seen and what I've tried to do in other industries is kind of thinking bigger picture and be ambitious long term. I think it's really great that, businesses are doing things ad hoc, and they work with this school or work with that school or this organization. But actually, how can you drive greater scale and greater value by thinking more strategically? So whether that be, identifying a community-based organization that works across the country that you work in, for example, then works across whatever targeted group of young people that you want to reach. Or even also something that I think would be great to explore is more an industry-led, similar to Critical Careers, a more industry-led initiative where, organizations and companies can pull together. Of course, we work across different geographies, and actually tackling that on a more strategic level, I think would be quite beneficial to make sure that you're sort of reaching the level of scale that you need to really reach and inspire young people to learn more about the industry. Get your people into schools and engage with them. I love going into schools and engaging with young people. They ask the most interesting questions.
Sure.
Sometimes they're not related to the industry. I think one person asked me how old I was once. Or asked about how many children I have. But I mean, it's just really fascinating to see how excited they are to have, adults come to the classroom and
Sure.
talk about the industry and their job. And, that's really beneficial, is get down to their level and talk to them so they understand, because quite often we have a lot of business jargon, right, in our business, in our industry. But how do you translate that into more relatable language with younger people
Sure.
to make it a bit more inspiring and exciting for them? And I think, just go out to your communities and listen and speak to them. And I said, every community is different. So I remember once working up in the Northeast, and we thought we were great at, we were running a community engagement session that wasn't part of the planning process, but we went above and beyond.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the planning just involves sending, documents after document to people and communities. And they don't know how to digest that information.
Right.
They don't know where to go for questions. And so actually providing an opportunity for them to talk to you in person, kind of to help their fears and their concerns, I think is really beneficial.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of success doing that up in Teesside.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about that. Like, if there was any examples of, how you were able to kind of bring that local context to an issue.
Yeah.
Because I think it is a new area for the industry. It's having to think about what happens in the local community, and thinking about how we engage and how we learn about what their local issues are. And I think, when we were kind of talking beforehand, you were giving some very simple, basic points that you had learned along the way.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of those things that people may not realize are simple but effective?
Well, I think I had to think back to when I was working in the Northeast, is that, and actually also saying in data centers, is that I think previously they've just been based in big city centers.
Yeah.
So here, in London, we're kind of used to seeing lots of buildings going up.
Right.
All my neighbors are renovating. Like, you're kind of used to the noise and used to the, to all of that. And as more data centers are moving outside of the outskirts and more, rural locations, that's when communities, start to be like, well, wait a minute, they don't want to be disrupted. What does this mean for the traffic? What does it mean
Yeah.
for my school run? That sort of thing. When I ran community engagement sessions, I said that we're beyond that regulatory planning requirement. We provided buses to local people who might not have a car to access to
Okay.
it. And so we had myself who were talking more about what we're doing for the community. We had our pipeline engineers. We had our health and safety people. So we kind of tried to address every single concern
Yeah.
that we assumed that people might have. And the feedback was really positive. I know we had a big celebratory evening later that night. We're like, this went, so well.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yeah.
was so congratulatory to us and so thankful. They're like, thank you so much for being able to come and listen to us, because like, we don't know how to digest this information you keep mailing to us.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different infrastructure going in the area, and you're the first big business to actually properly engage with us. I remember one woman came to me, this older woman, and said, what are you doing for my grandchildren, for the young people in this area? When I went into, some examples, and interesting enough, she said, well, that's the other side of the river. What are you going to be doing this side of the river?
Oh,
And
interesting.
actually, it was interesting. I'm like, to be honest, we had not even thought about that side of,
Yeah.
that side of the river. We
Yeah.
just thought this would suffice.
Yeah.
So, it's really helpful to understand their perspective. You're like, oh, actually, thank you very much. That actually, you're right.
Yeah.
This is something we actually need to consider to make sure that we appease as many people in the community as we can.
And it's such an interesting point, because it's not just a regional thing of like London versus Slough versus
Yeah.
other, regions in the UK, because
Yeah.
like here, the government is trying to build these AI growth zones.
Absolutely.
And okay, that's all well and good, and it sounds good on paper.
Yeah.
But then you get into that growth zone, and it's not just like, say, Manchester.
Yeah.
It's then what are the different regions of Manchester,
Yeah.
and really starting to dig down into what those very individual local community needs are.
Absolutely.
And that's a lot to balance.
It is, yeah. And I mean, I think I remember speaking to a colleague of mine about, exploring different partnerships with local colleges. And, part of my role is like that, that's a really great partnership, but actually that's not in the local community where the data center is going
Yeah,
to be.
right.
So I think absolutely it's great to explore that, but actually the first point of contact should be a local college in that exact community.
Yeah.
Because those are going to be people who want the jobs. And those
Yeah.
are the people who don't have to travel so far either,
Yeah.
to get the jobs. So local context is absolutely critical to ensuring that we address community concerns. And it goes beyond obviously just education and jobs. If they're worried about the environment, they're worried about
Yeah.
air quality, they're worried about traffic.
Well, in the industry, it's the power consumption, it's the water usage. I mean, and those are the
Exactly.
two big things
Yeah.
that you see mentioned. They're going to use all of our power and they're poisoning our water, which is a very strange, very drastic sounding,
Yeah. But
way
it's
to
just
talk
down to
about
they're
it.
not educated about it. And
Right.
so we have a role to play. And working with the government, because obviously they're investing in these as well. If they're pushing this critical infrastructure, and there's obviously need for it, that we have a job as an industry to educate the communities in which we operate in,
Yeah.
to make sure they understand, yes, okay, if there are risks, what those are risks, how we're going to mitigate those,
Yeah.
but also where the opportunities lie and actually where the myths are as well.
You do see a lot of comments of people feeling like this is just being imposed on them.
Yeah,
And so I think when you give people that chance to have their voice be heard
exactly.
and have that one-on-one conversation,
Yeah.
I do think it really makes a difference for
Yeah.
sure.
And it applies to every context. I mean, even when I was in Yemen many, many years ago, we were developing a new reproductive health program. And the first thing we did is, yes, we have desk-based research. Of course, we have that.
Yeah.
It's also, this country is heavily researched. But I actually went out into the communities and identify the communities that we assumed had probably the worst mortality rates, for example.
Yeah.
Postpartum hemorrhage, that sort of thing, and ask them, what do you think that what we can do to make sure that number reduces?
Yeah.
So even in that context, I mean, it's just really important to demonstrate that you're doing your best and you're trying to do it in the most meaningful way as possible.
Yeah.
And having the right people to know how to do that as well,
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's really important.
Yeah, for sure. One last question I want to kind of ask you, and it ties, back to kind of what we've been talking about. You've had a really interesting career, and you've talked a lot about how we demonstrate that. So from your perspective and your experience, why do you think this is an interesting career field for young people to think about and to consider?
I never thought I was going to find myself in this data center industry.
Everybody that sat on the
Has
couch
anyone said
across from
that?
me has said the same thing.
Yeah, I didn't think I saw myself in it. And I think really, it was just the high growth
Yeah.
opportunity. I mean, I've always loved working in extractives. I didn't really think I was going to leave, but I think the high growth opportunity, and actually opportunity that there's a lot to learn from other industries that are much more mature in their community engagement and their sustainability journey and their responsible business journey. But actually, this was an opportunity for me to join, to kind of build something from the ground
Sure.
up, because this
Sure.
industry is much more immature in community engagement, responsible business, apart from obviously the regulatory planning you have
Sure.
to do. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from other industries, which I wanted to kind of bring over into this industry. So I think it's really exciting. You got to meet loads of new people, again, engage with communities, a chance to really make a difference as well. And I think it's a great opportunity if every day is a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you get to, like I said, you get to meet interesting people and have really interesting conversations, and also just a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
I think it was really exciting for me to move over because I'd obviously been in extractives for a long time, and it was just something new. I'm learning something new every day about this industry.
Yeah.
So, and about my business as well. And I just think it's really great, and it's just going to continue to grow. The demand's going to get more and more. And so anybody who has interest, obviously, in community engagement and stakeholder engagement, this is I think, whether you're at the beginning of your career or you're mid-career
Yeah.
as well, or
Yeah.
even more myself, a little bit longer in your career, it's just something that is, I think it's just really exciting, and your opportunity to really make that difference.
Excellent. Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thanks again, Sarah, for such a great conversation. Next up, I talked to Anna Solar-Bassett, and she and I have a conversation about why community engagement is a lot like Politics 101, and why data centers really need to start thinking about their social license as the industry continues to grow. Hope you enjoy.
Great to be here, Joyce.
So I would love to kind of hear a little bit of, what has been your journey? How did you kind of find yourself in this role that you're in today?
I mean, I think like a lot of people in the sector, particularly probably women by accident, I like to say you fail upwards throughout your career, but I've never believed in like setting out with this sort of, perfect journey of where you have to be. I think I've followed my passions throughout. And as trite as that sounds, that's led me to really interesting opportunities. I was full of beans when I was a teenager and really interested in politics and community and giving back and making a difference, that youthful desire to change the world.
Yeah.
So I spent my 20s in politics and then directly inside government as a civil servant and a regulator as well. And I think from that, it was an unusual mix of government experience. People don't usually sit on both sides of the coin in both politics and then directly in government. But I really wanted hands on skills in campaigning. I really wanted hands on skills to learn about policy making. I really enjoyed. Seeing how the intersection between media and interaction with everyday communities went. And I think I learned a lot in my journey during that time in government about, um, the way the sausage was made, right? It's that old adage, like, don't watch laws or sausages being made because it's
Yeah,
such a fun
right.
old process. But I also saw from that, like I said, the intersection between voters and communities and the media and the policymakers and the politicians who are often genuinely trying to make a difference, and business in there as well. So I thought it was really interesting trying to understand how much sometimes I felt business was misunderstanding the drivers of politics and of the communities in which they operated. And then I saw some really good examples of how businesses tried to partner with and listen to people with very different sort of sets of drivers to them. So for me, I then became really interested in going in-house to a corporate and seeing how that got put together. And I worked at a big investor on the buy side for a few years that did a lot of technology investment. And from there, successfully ran a few campaigns related to the tech industry and got recruited in by Amazon. And from there, like I said, failed upwards through various different companies, Vodafone and TikTok and others. So for me, I think being in-house in those variety of different companies, it gave me different exposure to the way that different headquarters of those companies approach different local political issues. It gave me different exposure to the scale of the campaigns that would be run and the different styles of campaigning. But at the end of the day, I think each one of those companies is so invested in the infrastructure it operates. Obviously, it has to work very, very closely with the communities and the politicians, both locally and nationally. So that journey has been really interesting, looking at it from different lenses. But at the end of the day, some of the foundational learnings I had from government, you bring into any role in the corporate sector. So that's how I
Sure.
am where I am now.
Yeah, no, and that totally makes sense because I mean, I think all of us, regardless of what our career path is, we take the things that we've learned along the way and we add to it, we build from it and dig deeper into the things that we enjoy and, pull back from the things that we don't and that kind of stuff. So it
100%.
totally makes sense. I can hear how your experience is so relevant to what is happening today in this industry. It has now been thrust into the spotlight, and it is a and I don't think everybody's particularly comfortable with it. I don't think everybody kind of knows what to do with it. It's really hard because you have a very technical subject matter and you have to explain that to individuals who I've, seen online and seen in conversation that genuinely don't understand how it works. And they don't necessarily need to, but there's a job here to do now. And so, like, how are you seeing that play out? Like, why is now such an important moment?
It's funny, data centers are having a real moment, right? I joke with my boss. We said, like, back in the day, 10 years ago, no one wanted to talk about data centers. They were what one of our submarine cable experts internally inside the company currently calls, like, a shed with wires to run the internet. And I remember when I started at Amazon Web Services, their cloud unit, no one really wanted to talk about data centers more broadly. It was just this thing about the cloud and what is it? No one really cared about the infrastructure where it lived, even though it has a physical space. But I think in my career, I really enjoy, again, one of my favorite current colleagues says he likes to run towards fires, and I'm the same. And I think that it's most interesting when you're working on the issues that are front and center, whether that be the tech aspects, the sustainability aspects, the community aspects, the energy aspects. To your point, like how you go about addressing this, it's hard. But I think the number one thing you have to start with, which the industry is now recognizing, is you have to do those fundamentals that other industries have done for a long time. And you have to realize that it is flattering to be, the only thing less than being talked about is not being talked about. And the fact that everyone likes or is interested in our industry right now is a real opportunity to show some of the benefits of the industry as well as myth bust, and to answer some questions that are legitimate about how we plan to operate sustainably and how we plan to do the right thing moving forward. It's not just thinking about that national lens anymore. It's also thinking about um, rolling out and scaling effective community affairs programs, effective press and media engagement programs. And a lot of it is about integrated campaigning, which is
Yeah.
something that, again, the companies in particular that haven't had the platform challenges of big tech, the ones that are pure data center operators or real estate trusts, historically they thought of themselves as real estate, not as tech. So they're less used to these battles. And it's now about shifting that mindset into how do we be more proactive and campaign focused in this current environment? And how do we operate in a way that is, again, taking those learnings from Politics 101 and Government 101, about scaling what we do in the community, to listen humbly, to take that back internally, make appropriate changes, come back to the community. And how do we do some of those fundamentals about what we communicate about what we do so that we're less scary as well? Because a lot of the myths out there about the industry are that there are myths, there are relevant challenges that are appropriate, and some is myth busting. But the number one thing to do when you're trying to communicate is to acknowledge the concern or the fear behind a myth before you can actually get into underlying, discussions with communities about the reality of what's going to happen.
There's probably a trust issue that is kind of happening across all different levels, for a variety of different reasons, the geopolitical scene, whatever it is, there is a
Right.
level of trust in big corporations. There's a level of trust in big institutions. And when data centers and technology all get lumped into this big tech category, there's a distrust there. So doing those things to break that down, to really make that one-on-one connection with people is, yeah, clearly very important at this point in time.
I think there's a lot more that the industry can do to, like I said, listen and actually collaborate on some of these issues where you can distinguish yourself. I feel, and my current company feels, that being a leader in sustainability genuinely on water and energy practices is a win. Dirty data centers are not good for anyone in the industry. I'm passionate about women in the sector, hence this podcast, about the value of education into tech and STEM, but not just STEM, but particularly for blue collar jobs. I mean, the number of electrician jobs in this sector
Yeah.
where young electricians can be out and sparkies can be earning 100 grand plus a year. I mean, it's an incredible amount of labor and career pathways we can put people on. And I think it's important that, we're shouting about the value of blue collar work, for people who might not be looking at the STEM side and white collar. So there's so many good things. But to your point, I think recognizing the environment we're in and not fighting it, going with it and trying to run, appropriate campaigns around it that are humble and that address genuine questions that are very basic is very important. A lot of the time, communities ask us very simple things. Will my energy bill go up? No. Are you using sustainable water practices? Absolutely. Can the ambulance get down that tiny road where you're building? Of course, we're going to build a second access road. So these are genuine questions, and very legitimate if you have any form of infrastructure investment near you. So unsurprising they're having a moment as the industry scales and builds.
So I think it's interesting when you said about like the Politics 101. What does that look like in practice for an industry like ours that is really kind of, finding its feet in this area? What are you telling them to think about, and what are you telling them to practically do to make that difference?
Politics 101 is the same as being the new kid at school and making new friends 101. I mean, you go in and you're present and you listen and you learn and you're curious and you try and make genuine enough relationships that you can, again, like I said, have good conversations and have more difficult conversations where you have to. I mean, planning committees are difficult, right? There will
Yeah.
be, safety requirement X or this part of the trench and the build that needs to go through a roundabout where we'll have to have that conversation about making sure the cable's safe, all that like techie stuff. A lot of the leaders we work with in communities, principals, counselors, religious leaders, sports leaders, youth leaders are often interested in getting investment into their community or infrastructure that will bring with it upgrades. And a lot of it is about the basic essential infrastructure that you would also run during a campaign. So things like town halls,
Yeah.
community listening sessions, genuine open feedback sessions. So I think it's about being able to, like I said, have those relationships and be open and humble and directly listening to those concerns so that you have a good social license to operate. This isn't just about being a regulated industry and ticking a box. The whole point is you want to have good social license to operate in a community in which you plan to be for years. And if you're seen as a beneficial part of that community, it's much more effective for
Yeah.
everyone because you plan to operate there for a long time.
So do you think there's more the industry needs to do in working together and collaborating on this? I mean, obviously each company is going to have their own concerns and their own issues in the local communities that they're in. But are there areas as a community or as an industry as a whole that we can collaborate to try to maybe address some issues on a bigger scale?
Yes, but I would say that because of my job, it is necessary to put significant and appropriate resource behind engagement work if you want to do it effectively. It has to be integrated campaigns across all platforms, all media types. There has to be enough boots on the ground that people can be there to talk to the community regularly, understand their local concerns, have local relationships, have local languages, people who understand the concerns of that area very well. A very deprived, community in country X in Y part of Europe is going to be very different to leafy greenbelt person in this community. And it is really important that people have someone to talk to on a regular basis and for that two-way flow of information to go through this person from the community to the company and from the company back to the community so you can
Yeah.
make constant adjustments. I mean, I told you this before we started the podcast, but I call myself the Leslie Knope of data centers. If
Yeah.
anyone has watched that fabulous sitcom, Parks and Recreation, about the local bureaucrat who then becomes a counselor, it is so important to be that person on the ground. So I think industry should be thinking seriously about how it builds and scales these types of functions and assets around them. And I think collaboration in the industry to do more on campaigning together around some of these basics so that they're integrated campaigns as well, because a lot of the challenges we face might be different from site to site, or the relationships might be different. But at the end of the day, people are all asking us, particularly at the local level, people are asking us pretty similar questions. And
Yeah.
so pooled resources, always better than less. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
Yeah, no, of course, but I mean, and that's your expertise, and that's kinda how
Right.
that's why you're here today, and, doing the roles that you do and everything. But I also think it's a good point too, because I think we forget, like, yes, we all may play a function and play a role within the industry, whether it is on a sales side or real estate or technical or engineering or operations. But we all also are individual ambassadors for the industry and stuff as well too. You have a chance to have that one-on-one conversation with someone that may make them just think about something differently. I think there's a role and responsibility for all of us to play to be able to make your job easier on the
Yeah.
day-to-day basis.
And I think, yeah, I think ambassador is a good word, right? Like, again, I do a lot of coaching for this inside companies. I mean, if you're getting a lot of the attention, like I said, it's not a bad thing, it's flattering. And take that opportunity. And again, politics 101, people want to feel heard, but particularly when they're upset about something, the worst thing you can do is be defensive. You want to sort of listen and let things cool down first before you try to engage in the problem solving. And we are having such a moment at the data centers, and there is so much negative out there as well as positive. And I think somewhere the industry could be collaborating is on much more conjoined, media campaigning. Yeah, recognizing that is important. I think going into your point as an ambassador.
When you talked about your career journey at the start of our conversation, what makes your role interesting and what do you wish people knew about it? Because it can be a high pressure role. You are in the front, can be on the front line of all these disgruntled, companies or disgruntled community members and that kind of stuff. But what makes your role interesting that gets you excited every day when you wake up?
And I think that idea of making a difference in some kind of tangible way. I think if you've gone into politics or government, but you are so motivated by that. And I think if you are going to work on the corporate side and understand how the cookie crumbles and how it's cut, the ability to do that in a place where you feel like you can make that tangible two-way difference to say to a community, look, I'm going to understand those concerns and take them back. And we're going to make these changes, or I'm going to push the company to make these adjustments so you can get even more benefit. Or to say to a community, like, actually, we've thought about all these amazing things. cycleways and bridleways on one side. I'm thinking, for example, like, have you thought about that? So that for me is really, really interesting. And seeing the fruition of that come into areas that maybe traditionally are underinvested as well. I also really enjoy being a small part of that industry that, like I said, is really creating a lot of opportunities for non-white collar and blue collar employment that's significantly um, well paid and a real career path. And I think, like you said, I thrive on adrenaline and, pressure is good. Pressure makes diamonds. But I think in my career, it hasn't been planned out. It's sort of been what looks interesting at that time and what am I really interested in where I feel like I'm going to learn about and grow. Um, it's a very direct saying, but I saw it in my 20s and I've never forgotten it. On Facebook, of all places, so pushed out by a data center somewhere. And it said, "You're not a tree. If you don't like where you are, move."
Yeah.
So I have had that throughout my career where I've done something that I found so all-consuming and so interesting, and I've been so passionate about it for a while. And then after that, I feel like I've learned what I can from that, and I want to try this new thing at this new brand, or I want to try this new thing where I go into corporate. I want to try this new thing where I work on this topic. And that gives you a thread throughout your career of what you're good at and what you like to work on. But it keeps it interesting because the topics might change or the stakeholders might change, or it might be, a different jurisdiction. Or, yeah, I think following, again, it's try what interests you. And, work will be a lot more enjoyable and interesting than if I was, there are some professions I couldn't possibly put myself
Fair
into.
enough.
Yeah. Sit me down and get me to look at energy regulation all day and like the follow through of academic studies on grid connections versus this XY. And I'm having a great time. And I'll try and talk to my husband about that. And he's like, please, no more in energy law. So
Well, you know what, Anna? Thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. The spotlight is on us, and I think that reminder of, don't be afraid of it, and there's a reason that's happening right now, and there is a role for us all to play in that process too, I think is a really timely conversation for our podcast. So thank you so much.
no worries. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Joyce.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Critical Careers. A special thank you to our founder, KO Data, and to our strategic partners, CBRE, AVK, Evershed Sutherland, JLL, and Mace Construct, for their support in making the Critical Careers Initiative possible.